Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, for your time.
Good to see you again.
Very good to see you. I know from your Facebook, I'm following you on all social media, and I know from your Facebook that you're following Azerbaijani developments very closely. So I know you've been posted to a number of countries. I'm wondering why so much interest to Azerbaijan? I see you post about Azerbaijan and Bosnia and Herzegovina, another place where you were ambassador. So what is this interest with Azerbaijan?
Well, my wife and I, and we've talked about this, 32 years in the State Department and serving in Africa and the Middle East and parts of Europe. Bosnia may be part of Europe. I don't know. Azerbaijan may be part of Europe. But it was our favorite assignment. I mean, it was interesting because it was a culture and a part of the world that we really didn't know anything about till we got off the airplane in 1994 in the spring. And that, it's hard to imagine 25 years ago was when, in 25 years in April, was when we arrived in Baku. But it was just that we got along so well with people in Azerbaijan. And they showed hospitality that put us to shame. One of the first trips that we made was to go to, the war was still going on, fighting was still going on, so we went to the front lines to see the refugees and the displaced people. And after the ceasefire, we continued to go back there, and we would visit these poor people who were living in appalling circumstances in rail cars or tents or shelters, and you would come in and unannounced, and you would sit down and start talking, and suddenly someone would bring tea, and then a little bit of bread would start coming, and before long there was a full meal from people who had nothing. They knew us. I mean, we were strangers. Probably, if it would happen in the United States, we would be embarrassed to have that happen. But it was a natural friendliness that I don't think we've found anywhere else, and not that we've traveled the world, but anywhere else that we've been. So it's just a very comfortable place for us. We enjoyed our 3 years there. It went fast. Unfortunately, it was at a time when our son died, and we look back on that time and recall that people all over Azerbaijan would send us telegrams expressing their condolences. Again, people who didn't know us, they had no reason to do this, but it was just a natural part of what I think is enduring characteristics that we'll never forget about the people there. It was just lots of fun.
Well, I'm glad you remember it fondly. It's probably can be accounted for the love for the United States that was characteristic of the people in our region back then. Do you think, looking back at what's going on right now, and I'm asking you because I know you're an avid follower of what's going on, do you think the positions of the United States as the cultural magnetism, if you will, of the United States has changed since you had been posted there as an ambassador?
Well, part of it, I think there was unrealistic expectations about what the United States could do. And you know the environment better than I do, but during the Soviet period, I mean, people looked to Moscow to solve problems. If there was something that didn't work, Moscow would fix it. And independence comes along, and the United States suddenly, because of the role in the world that became even more evident in the early 90s, the expectation was we were going to fix things, either solve the war with Armenia or make sure that Russia didn't interfere in Azerbaijan, and that somehow there was a pot of gold that before oil became so prominent in the economy again. But the idea that somehow U.S. assistance would solve all the problems. In 25 years, a lot's changed in the world. I mean, I think the most important thing, and I base this mainly, I haven't been back to Baku since 2002, so that's a long time. But I think younger people now are more sophisticated. They're able to travel, go to school outside of Azerbaijan, look more critically at how the United States, Europe, Russia, and others behave, as opposed to rhetoric or what other sources of movies or other things they use to make judgments. So a lot has changed. We can't go back to that period. We will not have that same kind of respect. I think at the same time, there was a feeling that the United States was not treating Azerbaijan fairly because of Section 907 of the Freedom Support Act. Still a problem. I don't hear people talking as much about that. But I think in the back of most Azerbaijanis' minds is the fact that still they don't believe the United States is treating Azerbaijan in the same way that it treats Armenia. And that's, I think that's how shall I put it? It's an ongoing negative in the relationship, whatever else is happening.
To what extent are they right in their assessment? Is the United States treating Azerbaijan equally as Armenia, would you say?
I think if you would ask a U.S. government official or ask me at the time, I would have said, yes, we are. We've got this problem with our Congress, which says and does things and is capable of acting because of separation of powers, though that separation seems to be under some attack these days. But Congress can do things that the administration can't control. But I think if the real problem is not that many Americans even today know that much about Azerbaijan. And certainly in 1994, I probably could have counted on both my hands the number of people in the Washington area who really understood what was going on there in the people.
I would like to go back in time to those years when you were posted. I know we both would. I remember meeting you as a very young journalist working for an independent organization there. I would like you to comment, if you could, on your first impression of our current president. I know you've met Ilham Aliyev. What was your impression when you've met him? And do you think he has evolved over the years?
Yeah. It was probably about a year into my time in Baku that he was out of the country a lot. Obviously, when he was a younger person, he was educated in the Soviet Union, outside of Azerbaijan. And when we arrived, he had been spending time in Turkey and elsewhere. He'd come back periodically. It wasn't until he was appointed vice president of SOCAR that I got to know him more frequently. Actually, my wife knew Mehriban Aliyev much better than I knew Ilham, because together they were working on this Friends of Azerbaijani Culture group that tried to raise money to support people in the arts who, when the Soviet Union collapsed, they really lost pensions and other ways of supporting themselves. There were no practice shoes for the ballet, and so the very first thing that Anne and Mehriban worked on was a fundraising project to raise money for shoes. But Ilham Aliyev was young. We all are different when we're young. He didn't seem as interested in politics at that time, certainly not like his father was. I mean, I've always admired Haydar Aliyev, not necessarily for everything that he did, but for his having a sense of what the Azerbaijani people thought. I can recall these TV interviews where he would sit around a table with a bunch of grandmothers, and just talk about problems that they were having. Mainly, these were refugee families, but he would listen, and it was a very, very real engagement. Ilham was involved with SOCAR and with energy. I thought that he, in my contacts with him, understood what the issues were as we were getting that energy development going in the mid-90s. But the political side just didn't seem to be anything that he spent a lot of time on. I remember the first time he was on a list for Parliament. He didn't do much campaigning that I could see. It was just pictures and all. And I think now, certainly in the last few months, I've been very struck by this, that I won't say he's imitating his father, but he's acting like a president who's concerned about the people. There were these earthquakes, I can't remember now, there's several of them, so I can't remember which ones they were, but he was out visiting people, on the ground, not sending the Minister of Emergency Services or someone else out to do this. And it shows that he's, I think at least, he's making that kind of shift to be seen as someone who really is concerned about people's problems. Now, why he's doing that is another. I'm not in a position to judge. But he always, even in those early days, and I think part of it was because he spoke English. He always makes a good impression on foreign visitors because he engages in real conversation, knows. Again, particularly on the energy side, a lot that people can come away and say, this is a serious leader. It's not just someone who's sort of playing at this. So, bottom line, I think he's grown up, and I don't say that critically. I just, as an observer, I think he's become more credible in his own right, rather than simply relying on the fact that his father was president. The other thing that strikes me is how much hasn't changed. I mean, I look at the people who surround Ilham Aliyev, and with rare exceptions, they're the same group of people who were there in 1999 or 97 when I left. Excuse me. That's not a good sign. And the people who are in decision-making positions are still caught up in this Soviet mentality. Not many of them, unlike the young people, not many of them have been educated in the West.
And you think that is important?
I think it's important because if Azerbaijan is going to become a modern economy and society, you can't do it by waiting for the president to give orders.
Right.
To me, the classic example of that was this recent fire in the shopping center in downtown Baku, and one of the local deputy mayors, I can't remember who it was, to his credit, was meeting with the merchants who were obviously saying, "What are we going to do now? The banks are asking for money. We can't even get back in here to see, if our stuff is still there." And his answer was, well, I'm listening to what you're saying, and I will take what you're saying and talk to the people at the next higher level. And it's that, the president's going to solve this. I mean, that was the implied message there. And that's the kind of thing that I think really has to change, so that either people have the freedom together to solve their own problems, or you have effective mechanisms to help them out, either from the government or insurance companies, so that this is not a sort of an existential crisis for them, this accidental fire. And that, I think, that the fact that hasn't changed, the presidential apparatus is dominated by the same four people who were there when I was there. And, they don't like me very much, but
they don't.
No.
Do you have any sense of why?
I'd like to ask them that, because it was about I guess it was 2013. There was a presidential election then. And former colleagues of mine, Ken Yalowitz and Bill Courtney, who were ambassadors in Georgia and Belarus, and I would write joint op-ed pieces. And in one of those pieces, there was something about concern that the 2013 elections would not be democratic, and that, you know, it was time for that to change. Well, in one of the media outlets, government media outlets, there was a story that said, well, you know, Kozlariç was carried drunk out of a reception in Baku, and he associated with what were in English, the English translation was non-traditional religions.
Okay.
And that I was in the pay of Rasul Guliev.
Aha, oh great.
Wonderful. So, you know, and you know, I was thinking, if they're going to put out these lies about me, I mean, what I can't hurt them. I mean, I'm one person with a computer and internet, and I read stuff and have opinions, but you know, it was from the people who control the, if you will, the messaging that these kinds of attacks go. It got far worse for my successors. I mean, Ambassador Morningstar, you know, where his conversations, I'm sure my conversations with Aliyev were recorded too, but the fact that they were recorded and then made public almost as a piece of blackmail, you know, it just shows you how, you know, back to this change in mentality at senior levels that really is necessary for Azerbaijan to truly go forward.
It is not a common practice, right, to record private conversations with foreign ambassadors.
No.
I don't think it's been done I can't remember another such example of it being done anywhere.
Yeah. I mean, you always, when you go into meetings, and this is, you know, it may be a little funny after all the publicity about the Putin-Trump meeting, the no note takers. I mean, I never went to a meeting with Riçard Aliyev just by myself. I would always have someone from the embassy staff to be there to take notes. I mean, that's done, you know, so that you have a record of what you said and what the other said. But sort of clandestinely recording the conversation for the purpose of using that recording to blackmail someone, that's not done.
I understand.
That's KGB.
Probably is. Well, let me assure you that whatever the feelings of these few people in the government, our people don't seem to share these opinions of you, because I still see very positive remarks coming from all strata of the society, on social media, in the media itself, in the traditional media, praising your time as an ambassador. People seem to think fondly of you and the time when you were representing the United States. I cannot say, though, in all honesty, that is true of some of your successors. I don't know to what extent you're free to comment. I'm asking you as an American. I know you've retired from diplomatic service now, but to whatever extent you're comfortable talking about some of your colleagues, because I personally believe that the behavior of some of your colleagues did damage the reputation of the United States. To me personally, that is also a crying shame, because I'm a U.S. citizen as well, and they represent, in a very tiny part, they represent me as well.
Not a tiny part. If you're a U.S. citizen, they represent you entirely. You know, you pay taxes and you deserve to have the best. Well, let me talk about me for a minute. I mean, I think one of the reasons that people think fondly during that period was my wife. I mean, here she did this on her own. She had no resources to do this, but she took a great interest in Azerbaijani culture. I mean, we loved to go to the opera and the symphony and the ballet, and even though that wasn't something we did much of before we came to Azerbaijan. It was just so easy, and there was so much to do. And she not only took an interest in finding ways to support these talented people who were going through some very, very tough times, but also she learned the Azerbaijani language in a way that I am still in awe. and she did it not by going to school, but just going out and talking to people, and this work with cultural groups, I think, helped as well. So I give her 90% of the credit. The other part of it was, even though 907 was there, and that was a negative, I mean, that kind of like a black cloud over my head no matter where I went. And this was not, how shall I put it? This was not an organized campaign, but I could go out again visiting refugees, and here are people who are probably not very well educated themselves, and don't really know much about the United States and all. But I would sit down with them, and inevitably they would say, "You have to get rid of Section 907 of the Freedom of Sport Act because it's not fair to Azerbaijan."
It was coming from the people.
And this was not, nobody was there sort of prodding them to do it. I mean, I thought that was always a problem for me. But what we were able to do, despite those restrictions, was, one, help Azerbaijan get to the point where it could start making its own decisions about its energy future without worrying about Russia or Iran or even Turkey trying to tell it what to do. And secondly, and I don't want this to be misunderstood, because Washington wasn't as interested in Azerbaijan in 1994 as they are today, I could do things as ambassador without having to wait for instructions if I thought it was appropriate. I could, visit journalists who had been beaten in the hospital, and, go to trials of opposition political leaders, and, go to religious services when I heard that the police were going to come and break up the service. Those were things nobody told me to do. I just had a sense that, there's something about being an ambassador that carries an extra status within the society, but an extra responsibility to be seen as doing the right thing. And that's not going out and creating revolutions, things of that nature, but it is when you can do it to show that you're there more, always representing your government, but at the same time also representing the values that you understand. Now, not all ambassadors believe the same thing, and some of my successors had to make different kinds of judgments because times changed, and they were more concerned about preserving a relationship with the political authorities. I was too, quite frankly. I mean, I wanted us to be seen in the right light by Riçard Aliyev and his government. I helped obtain a visit for Riçard Aliyev to Washington in the Oval Office with Bill Clinton. But when I left Azerbaijan, I guess I could have tried to get a job with an oil company or something like that. I did knock on a few doors and found out they really weren't interested in me, so I decided to do other things. But I think former ambassadors really need to stay away from physically coming back to the place where they were ambassadors to do business. I just think that.
Does it look bad?
It can look bad. It can look bad. I don't know enough about all of the people who followed after me, but a number of them I know well enough, and a number of them I think were very good ambassadors, terms of representing the United States. I was always more critical on the human rights side, but I didn't know what they were doing, independently and sort of below the public view on those things. I still think ambassadors can play a role by being out front and reflecting the values they represent, and not always trying to conduct this behind closed doors. I don't believe in quiet diplomacy on some of these things.
I remember your support, at least emotional support, when some of our media, back when we did have independent media operating in the country, were in trouble or faced pressure from the government. The support of the United States Embassy was always there, and you as an ambassador, of course you weren't on the barricades or you weren't doing, but we always sensed it, and I totally do remember that.
One thing we could do then, even with 907, was to provide some basic assistance to independent media. And so, because we couldn't have programs, bringing journalists from government media to the U.S., we were able, however, to provide equipment and training to independent media. So we were, that was one thing we could do that made a difference, I think. As long as there was an independent media.
True, and there were some of them operating. I don't think there are any independent media there now. You probably do follow some of our media to the extent you can. What do you think has changed? Is there something that jumps at you when you look at the way the media cover the situation now as opposed to back then?
Well, my judgment today is that inside Azerbaijan there is no independent media. There are a lot of media outlets, social media outlets, as well as more traditional. But the ability of journalists to criticize the government, to report, in a normal fashion, I think are limited. They don't, nobody from Azerbaijan TV, official Azerbaijan TV, would come and do an interview with me because, that wouldn't be seen as a popular thing. At the time, we would have press conferences, and official and non-official media would be there, and people would ask questions, and it was, it certainly was far from perfect. I mean, Riçard Aliyev during that time was controlling the media as well, but there at least were opportunities for independent voices. Now, I'm sad to say that it's people like you and others who are think of it as the diaspora. They're the ones who can do things now that are important to bring to the attention of Azerbaijanis. But I just don't know how much access, given the fact that RFERL, BBC, satellite time for independent Azerbaijani media is just cut off.
You mentioned diaspora. I have to ask you. The so-called diaspora, the Azerbaijani diaspora in Washington, I'm pretty sure you follow what they do. And the scandals that they seem to basically walk into from time to time. From an observer's perspective, do you think their work is effective? Do you think they understand the environment in which they're trying to operate? Do they understand the values of the country where they're trying to, let's say, build sympathy, to put it this way?
The official effort to promote Azerbaijan, I think, has been a failure. I mean, it's just, if I were, there would be one job that I would do for the government, and that is to carry out a study of just, has the government of Azerbaijan received value for the dollars that it's spent, hiring K-Street lobbyists and journalists and people in the academic and think tank world to write pieces that say good things about Azerbaijan? Has that made a difference? Has it affected administration policies? Has it affected attitudes in the Congress? And I would say it has not. It just has, it has just not come across in the right way. And part of it is the repression that goes on in Azerbaijan doesn't leave much of a good story to tell. So the default position is to talk about Formula One racing in Baku and Lady Gaga coming to whatever the celebration, European Games, and have these very, very fancy, videos of the flame towers and drones or whatever flying over Baku to show how much like Dubai it is. But that doesn't. I don't think that makes much of an impression here, and it's certainly lost with the administration. The administration, and this is true whether it's Obama or Trump, very transactional, and they're not going to do things because you've got a fancy, a fancy capital with modern buildings. It's going to be what are you going to be able to do in cooperation with the United States that plays to our interests as well. Energy is not as important as it used to be. And then there have been enough scandals about paying for travel and carpets for members of Congress. You could have avoided that problem and still had these people come to Baku. So I would say the official side has not been very successful. The unofficial side, I don't get a sense that there's kind of a common effort. A lot of very, very good individuals concerned about human rights in Azerbaijan and doing what they can with individual members of Congress to promote that. But once you get beyond, the classic cases of Hajia and Eldar, sorry, there isn't a real collective effort.
Going back to what you said, that the diaspora doesn't seem to be able effective, if I'm rephrasing, I apologize, in understanding that it is a human rights situation that gets coverage, that it is a human rights situation that paints the picture for them. Do you think the Azerbaijani government understands that, or does it understand that and ignore it, in your opinion?
I think they ignore it. I think what officially is done to promote Azerbaijan in Washington is done more to impress people back in Baku. Look at all the things we're doing. We're having these events.
Spending money.
Yeah, we're spending money, and here are these messages from various people, some of whom are quite unusual to be speaking about Azerbaijan, having really no knowledge of the situation, but they can point and say, well, the state legislature in New Mexico passed a resolution, whether it's Hojole or on Azerbaijan's independence day. These things look good in Baku. It's nice to have a story about it in the Azerbaijani press, but I can assure you the members of the New Mexico legislature know nothing about Azerbaijan.
And maybe don't care as much.
Yeah, I mean, they respond to constituents' interests and, recognizing this or that, either a national day or something else. So again, back to cost-benefit analysis, if you would just release the political prisoners that everybody is complaining about, you would get more good publicity by that act than anything else you could organize as far as a cultural event or a big gala down in one of the major hotels in Washington. I worry about Iran, that this administration is putting such a stress on, constant pressure by friends and neighbors alike on Iran, that Azerbaijan's going to get caught because you, Azerbaijan, need to have a good relationship with Iran. You can't go to war with them or be part of a war with them, against them.
Do you think there is such a threat or such a condition?
Well, I don't like some of the rhetoric I hear. Now, whether it'll be war or not, I think the pressure will be on to apply the economic sanctions, more sanctions against Iran. And so a country like Azerbaijan that has trading relationships, including in energy, is going to have to make a choice that I think is unfair for Azerbaijan. So the rhetoric about strategic relationship with the U.S., the Iran part is going to be tricky, be tricky for the Azerbaijan side to manage.
Do you think that the United States might, one way or the other, put Azerbaijan in a position where it might find itself, excuse me, at war with Iran, or?
Well, I would worry more about Israeli behavior on that front, and they are pretty unpredictable when it comes to that. I just think it's the most sensitive period in terms of relationships between Iran and Azerbaijan. Nagorno-Karabakh is out there as we are now, again, 25 years since ceasefire in 1995. If it had not been for the Russians, the fighting would have continued.
You think they stopped it?
Yes, I'm convinced that they stopped it. It was not in their interest. A normal relationship between Armenia and Azerbaijan, a peaceful resolution of Nagorno-Karabakh, may not be in their interest either. But war is not in their interest. And I think the thing that troubles me most is that after all of this time, that there really is no diplomatic engagement between Armenia and Azerbaijan that goes beyond foreign ministers getting together, and now I understand the presidents will be meeting somewhere in Europe later, but that's not a negotiation. The greatest concern I have is military conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan over Nagorno-Karabakh. And, there's just too much else going on in the world that will distract people, and it's a big problem.
Do you think Azerbaijan has used the time, the oil revenue, the money, wisely in the last 25 years? In other words, what I'm trying to get at is, as much as you see what's going on and you follow it closely, do you think we as a country, as a nation, could have covered a little larger distance maybe this time?
I think so. I think too much emphasis has been, again, placed on the image, and for whatever reason, Dubai seems to be the model, where you have this oil-rich country that has all this infrastructure in the capital city. I think two things have not been done. That is to address the concerns in the countryside. I hear from people who tell me when you get out of Baku, it's the same old Azerbaijan. And, not just economically and socially, but politically as well. And the second part of this is there's been no effort to use that money to diversify the economy. A lot of talk, about roadmaps and plans and all. And when you come right down to it, there really hasn't been anything that's changed. It's still 80% of the GDP relies on the energy sector. It's easy money. I mean, Azerbaijan doesn't have to work too hard for that. If you're going to make economic change, you need to open up the economy, but there are political consequences from that, because you have to open up the society to new ideas and people trying them, to, in some cases, succeed, but also fail, but to do it independently of the government. And as long as the pattern of governance is based on corruption and a kleptocracy, as Azerbaijan is, it's going to be very, very hard to change that, because if you make economic reforms, you're going to cut into somebody in the elite who controls a part of the economy which may not be doing very well, but it's generating income
For them.
for them.
I have to ask this, and I know you've alluded to the role of Russia a little bit earlier on the Karabakh conflict. What do you see the role of Russia as on a net basis? Is it net positive, net negative? What is Russia's aspiration and ambition in the region, do you think? And to what extent is it detrimental or helpful to the general dynamic? I would ask you to comment on Transcaucasus, if you may, Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, because these three countries seem to be a little bit different in terms of their democratic development, and I'm putting it mildly.
Well, I mean, you have to look at Russian behavior in kind of a multi-dimensional way. I think in the early days, right after independence, and Russia just had no idea what they wanted to do. They didn't understand how to relate to any of the former republics that were now independent states. The Russians were laggards in establishing an embassy in Baku, partially because I think they just couldn't bring themselves to figuring out how to deal with an Azerbaijan that was independent. I'm very critical of Russia and Russia's role. I think they have done everything they can to undermine U.S. and Western influence in the energy sector. They failed. I mean, they were the ones that blew up this issue of Caspian demarcation. Within 2 weeks of signing the deal of the century, the Russians objected via diplomatic note to any agreement to develop subsea resources in the Caspian without all 5 riparian states agreeing to it. Fortunately, Ilham Aliyev took a firm line, and fortunately the U.S. and U.K. and European countries did too, not to let that happen. But there was a time, I think, when Russia's political interest really wasn't formed very well. Once Putin arrives on the scene, one, got to settle the Chechen war that was just a horrible, horrible situation. But two, begin to assert Russian authority back into this region. And that is only expanded. The bright spot, if you want to think of it in those terms, has been that Russia has remained a positive actor on the Minsk Group and Nagorno-Karabakh. I tell people, I listened to the foreign ministry spokesperson talking about the Russian position on it's up to the parties to negotiate the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. Military action is not the way to solve it. And I said, that could have been the State Department. That could have been me talking about the same thing. But that's gone along with this much more aggressive Russian posture since the war in Georgia. And in Azerbaijan, I think Putin has much more influence with Ilham than the Russians did with Haidar. I don't know what that means, frankly. I do know that people like Ramiz Mektiev back in December of 2014 wrote this very long polemic about how the West essentially had not only disappointed Azerbaijan, but was undermining Azerbaijan, the current authorities, and that Azerbaijan's future was really more with Moscow. And I think that idea has continued to dominate official Baku thinking.
I know it's going to sound comical. I'm going to ask you to parse Ramiz Mektiev's polemic, but do you think there was at least grain of truth in what he wrote, or was it completely outlandish?
I don't think, first of all, I don't think anything that is attributed to him is accidental. I mean, it's all very intentional. I mean, when he writes something like this, there's a reason for it, and it's serious, and it represents, if you will, an ideological orientation for the current authorities. I think Ilham Aliyev and those in the elite are disappointed in the United States because they only hear from us when there's a political prisoner who is sick in jail and needs to be released, or someone's being held in a Swiss embassy in Azerbaijan and can't get out of the country. And this embarrasses the government. I mean, look, they're conscious of image. They want a good image, and this is not a good image. And when they turn to Moscow, they don't hear anything about any of this. That's not important for Moscow. They may be unhappy about some of the comments that people make about Armenia, and there's always that background to it. But they're certainly not going to get criticized for human rights. They're not going to be accused of having non-democratic elections. They're not going to be criticized for not making economic reforms. So it's a more comfortable political relationship as long as, and I've seen no signs of this, as long as Putin doesn't try to become directly involved in internal politics in Azerbaijan.
But friends always tell friends the truth, even if that truth is not very convenient, right?
That was my principle. I would have expected the same from Riçard Aliyev when I talked to him too. But when there's a human right, when a country undertakes obligations freely, which Azerbaijan did, when it joined the Council of Europe, the OSCE, the UN, for that matter, and then violates these principles in terms of treating its own people, somebody needs to say something. And ideally, it should come from a government, but if it doesn't come from the government, it should come from somewhere.
If things were to change, would you come to Azerbaijan?
If things were to change, I think I would. I'm not sure I would now. I wouldn't feel comfortable.
Well, when you do, please bring Anne along.
Well, she will go first. She will. She'll be there to. No, but seriously, we haven't talked. If there was a different, more welcoming situation from our point of view, we wouldn't want to just drop ourselves into Baku these days. But we continue to pay attention and listen to our CDs of all of the Azerbaijani symphony and ballet music that we used to watch in person.
Right. I appreciate your time very much.
Not at all. I'm glad that you're doing this, and I hope it's a different media environment, and there have to be as many voices out there as you possibly can have to talk about Azerbaijan, for both Azerbaijanis to understand the U.S., but more important for Americans to understand Azerbaijan. So, thanks.
Thank you.